Hello YouTube, how's it going? Hope you're doing well today. Welcome to today's video, which is the 2-minute rule for more interesting photos. I'm sure it's happened to you because I know it happens to me all the time. When you create a photo, you go click and you look at the back of your camera and you don't quite like what you see. It's not exactly what you hoped it would be, what you envisioned, why you stopped to go ahead and get your camera out and create a photo in the first place. So my general reaction to that historically has been, well, move on to the next photo. And I think that's a mistake. And I know that's a mistake. And I've learned that's a mistake. So now what I do, because I'm lazy, is rather than think, oh, I got to spend all this time to create the photo, find the one, the reason I stopped, the one that's going to do it, I think in 2-minute increments. So that's what the 2-minute rule is all about. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, what we have to do is set a little groundwork for what I mean by interesting photos. I'm going to do a brief explanation of that. Then we'll go into why and how the 2-minute rule works. Then we will walk through some of the checklist, the kind of mental checklist I have when I look through the 2-minute rule. And then I'll also, at the end of the video, include some photos that I took yesterday that showcases some of the process of doing this. So, are you ready? You got a beverage? You sitting down? Here we go. It's okay if you're standing up too, by the way. So, let's talk about interesting photos, what that's all about. So first, and I've created a video about this in a composition series, so you can watch that. Actually, it's up here. If you click up here, watch that. No, wait, it's up here. That's where the link goes. It's up here at the top right. I use the phrase interesting photos as a framework for evaluating and critiquing my own photos and the photos of others. It creates a kind of a simple baseline to evaluate both objectively and subjectively photos. So the way I do this is by first describing what interesting means. And interesting means it's something that holds your attention. It stops you in the scroll. It stops you as you're looking at a million photos. It's the one that stands out. Or even if you're looking at 10 photos, it's the one that stands out, that grabs your attention. So things that hold your attention, to dive into that a little bit, are things that are unique, rare, and different. Things that have something about them that we don't see all the time. They're uncommon. And there's lots of ways to do that, both in the which we'll get to in the building blocks. So that's what's next. Every photo ever created uses the same 4 building blocks. So there's no magic button on here. There's no secret dial or menu setting that's going to help you create a more interesting photo with one magic secret. So here are the building blocks. There are 4 of them. So the first one is the subject, and then we add light, and then we add the composition, which is what you do to frame the photo, to put the elements in the frame and how you arrange them. And then last is processing, software, getting back to a computer, sitting down and finishing the photo, which is analogous to what was done in the analog or wet dark room. That was the developing process. And there was lots of manipulation that went into that. So that equals an interesting photo. You add all those up, and hopefully the result of each of those elements will either collectively or individually carry enough interest, enough uniqueness, enough rareness, enough difference to hold your attention. So so here's how it works. Again, sometimes they're equal in holding your attention and your interest. Each element brings a level of interest, and sometimes one element is the predominant carrier of the interest. So that's the framework I use for discussing and evaluating photos, my own and as I look to other people. Call it interesting photos. I don't have a catchy name for it, but that's what it is. So let's go into the 2-minute rule now. And the 2-minute rule is a way to kind of trick your mind a little bit to say, okay, when you look at the back of your camera and you're not quite there yet with the photo you created, If I take 2 more minutes, I bet I can do it. And that's a nice digestible chunk of time. It's not too long, it's not too short. I mean, most of the time you can say, yeah, I can do 2 more minutes. So if you just approach it in that short duration, it seems very doable and it doesn't seem overwhelming. So especially as you're new at this, or if you're busy and doing photos like for an assignment in one of my classes, you may think, I got to get to the next thing. So 2 minutes is doable. Plus, it's an easy sell if you're with other folks and you just say, I need 2 minutes to get the photo I want. Just don't tell them that sometimes you might need 10 of those 2 minutes, and a half hour later, 30 minutes later, 20 minutes later, you're still working on the photo. Shh, don't tell them that part. And that's what happens oftentimes. If you're thinking I can do this in 2 minutes, if I just take 2 more minutes, if I just keep working it, oftentimes you'll find you get into the zone then, and a half hour later, you've taken 100 photos and you're going, wow, I enjoyed that. That was a great challenge. I learned some things and I created the photo I was looking for. So here's my checklist I use as I'm thinking about the 2-minute things. And I'm going to break it into technical components, composition components, creative component, and processing component. So let's start with the technical things I'm thinking about and looking at when I'm working on these photos. So let's take a look at some of the technical components I look at as I'm employing the 2-minute rule for creating more interesting photos. And the first thing I look at is the obvious one, is the photo sharp and in focus. So is everything that I want to see visible in focus? Did I not introduce any camera blur by a longer shutter speed? So checking that is important because that's something we can't fix in software. Blurriness and focus, we cannot address in software yet. We'll see. And then related to that is the part of the photo I want in focus. So if I'm taking a picture of, as I did recently, a flower, is the flower in photo that I want to feature? And is it good in sharp focus? And then the third thing I look at when I'm looking at the technical stuff is the exposure. Is the exposure what I want? Not is it correct, but is it what I want? You think about stories, think about moods. Maybe I want it a little darker. Maybe I want it a little brighter than what is correct exposure. And if you're not sure, go ahead and take one that's brighter, take one that's darker, and take one that's correct. That's my approach. So checking the exposure would be the third technical component I'll look at. Next, we're going to look at composition stuff within that 2-minute rule. So as I'm looking at the image and I'm looking at the back of my screen and I'm not there yet, here's some more things you can do in 2 minutes, sometimes even less. So the first thing I look at and why I may not like the photo, is there any distracting elements in the frame? Is there something around the corner near the edge that pulls my eye away from what I want to look at and the reason I took this photo? So the first question to ask if you do notice that is, can I physically go and move that? And if yes, then go do that. If something you can't physically move, then ask the question, can I fix it in software using some Photoshop or Lightroom or other software to remove that? And if you don't think you can do that, then the next step is to recompose. So you either hide that distracting element with something else, or you move it out of the frame. All right. The second thing to look at composition-wise to get you to that interesting place, the reason you created the photo in the first place, is to ask yourself, have I composed the subject in the frame the way I want? Is it where I want? Is it in the middle? How is it in relation to the other things in the frame? Does it do what I need it to do, or should I move it or try another option to better tell that story? So changing the framing where the subject is in the box of your photo. The third thing I do, and one of the things I often do, is can I create a more interesting perspective that would get me to that more interesting photo. So for me, that means usually moving away from taking my photo at my normal standing height and moving to some other perspective, or getting closer or really far away from my subject, getting below it, getting above it if possible, walking around it, changing my perspective on the subject and its relationship to all the stuff around it. That's important and a powerful way to probably get you to that more interesting composition. The next composition, I've lost count, I think it's number 4 or 5, of things you would want to check when you're looking at the back of your camera to decide what else you might do to get you to that interesting photo, is the appearance of motion. Do I want motion? Do I want to freeze motion? Do I want to add motion either in the subject or the camera? Could that do something to help create the photo that I visioned when I stopped and took my camera out? And lastly, and this is one I do pretty often, would be, can I use a different focal length, a different lens or focal length combination to create that perspective, that look that I want on this particular subject? Maybe you need to be really wide angle and show the big picture and the scale and the context of the subject. Or maybe you need to be really close and intimate with your subject, and the surrounding area isn't as important. You just want to focus on the subject by itself. So considering focal length, lens choices, combining with moving your feet to put you in a different place, that will really change the composition and potentially get you to that more interesting photo. So that's the composition stuff. Next up is processing stuff. So we're going to look at software and think about things we can do there to help us while we're taking the photo. So this assumes you know a little bit about how you process images, your capabilities. So I think of these things often as I'm taking the photo to know whether I'm done or not. So the first thing I do is look at the exposure, and I decide, is it in the range that I know that both my camera can render correctly and the software I can push and pull if I need to make it brighter or darker or bring out attention to certain areas and different exposure tonal ranges. I'll just leave it at that so we don't take 40 minutes on this video. So the second thing I'll look at is the crop, as I'm considering what's on the back of my camera and am I done or not. Can I crop out anything that might be a distraction? Can I maybe go to a square crop to go more interesting? Do I go panoramic type crop, go vertical? So those are things you could think about as you're looking at the back of your screen and going and wondering, am I done yet? Am I at my 2 minutes, or am I done early? Or do I need another 2 minutes? And then the last thing I've kind of already mentioned is, as you look at the back of your camera, consider what you could do in software is related to distractions. So is there a distraction that I know I can remove in software? And if there is, then you're good to go. And if not, I'm not sure how to do distraction removal. Well, then the solution would be to recompose, move yourself and your camera to potentially hide that distraction or have it no longer in your frame. And the last thing I do when I remember to do it, I often forget these, and they're so much fun. I don't know why I forget them. Are the creative options. So doing something out of left field, something different. So I'm looking at the back of my camera. I'm not happy yet. I'm taking 2 more minutes. Here's some more things to think about. The first one, and it relates to processing and the exposure question, is when I create the photo and the exposure is challenging, so maybe it's both really bright and really dark at the same time, would HDR, a high dynamic range photo, help with that? And again, I'm not going to go into details on that here. There's lots of videos about that, and I plan to make one soon. But look at HDR to help both from a creative standpoint, because you'll get better tonal ranges in both the brights and the darks and the middles. Would that help creatively, and would it help aesthetically? So you don't have a pure white sky if you don't want it, or shadows that are pure black. Would that maybe help? A second creative option is to think about multiple exposure. Especially with mirrorless cameras, it is really easy to create multiple exposures because when you click on the first image, that'll be kind of a ghost overlay as you're composing the second image to try something interesting and creative. And the third thing you might think about as you're thinking of creativity options to tell the story you want is to think about a long exposure. To think about, could I accentuate motion, smooth the motion? This is great for water, for clouds, or lots of different things to create a really interesting perspective on something. Or if there's people walking around and you don't want them in your photo, if you take a really long exposure, they'll kind of disappear if they keep moving. So you might need a tripod for that. So a tripod is a creative tool for long exposures. So what I want to do next is show you how I apply this 2-minute rule and how I used it yesterday in creating some photos of some flowers just outside our front door that my wife planted. It's called a bee balm plant, and we'll take a look at some of those photos here in Lightroom and walk through the process really quickly. All right, so here we are in Lightroom. So yesterday afternoon, I took some photos of a plant outside our front door, and I was experimenting with it. And I took 72 photos, excuse me, and I took about 16 minutes to do that. So one of the cool things about the 2-minute rule is, like I said before, you get in the zone often, and all of a sudden time has flown by. And if you enjoy photography, it's kind of neat to be in that moment of zen where you're just moving along, creating photos, trying different options, all on one non-moving object to get the one. Not everybody understands that, but you do. So here's what I created, how it worked. So this is where I started, this photo. I was focusing on this one flower, and what's amazing is where I started and where I ended is pretty much the same photo. And that'll happen to you. Here's where I ended. So it's a little closer, a little tighter. So it's a refinement of that first photo. So this photo wasn't the one. It's close, but it's not there yet. And so what I'm going to explore is a whole bunch of other options. I'm going to explore different compositions using different lenses. So let's just walk through them quickly. Here I'm just playing around, mostly the same. I'm trying slightly different compositions, making sure I've got good sharpness. I'm changing aperture to go to f8.0 because that's a good general sharpness range for most lenses. The lens I'm using is the 16 to 80 here. This photo was at, let's see, what was it at? 80 millimeters. And then I'm as close as I can to the flower. So just moving around here. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing where I'm going to struggle, and that's going to be I'm relatively low light, so my ISO is at 1600, not ideal. This camera does okay at that, the XT3 from Fujifilm. But my shutter speed at 250, I'm leaning down, the flower's down low, so I worked a wedding the day before, so I was a little shaky. Even at 1/250th of a second, even with the optical image stabilization in this lens, they weren't quite as sharp as I was wanting. So that's another thing to check for, is to zoom in on the back of your camera to check sharpness. So zoom to 100% to see that it is really sharp, because when you're zoomed out, it looks sharp, and then you get to the computer and you go, it's not sharp. And then you're sad. And then you need another 2 hours because you have to go recreate the photo. I tried some vertical. So if you're not sure what's working and you're creating horizontal photos, go vertical. And if you're going vertical and it's not working, go horizontal. Also, now I'm down lower. Instead of being above the flower, I'm down low. So I tried that for a little bit, experimenting. Again, multiple shots here, mostly for sharpness, not really changing much, but just to make sure I get a sharp one. Then I zoom way out to show the context, mostly so I can show you what we're dealing with here. And I don't like this at all. Again, we've got lots of distractions in the background. It's a pretty scene, but it doesn't show this one flower. So I was playing around with getting way low and below the flower. which I kind of like, but again, it's not quite there. Maybe a different time of day, this might work better. Got a little closer for that. I like this better. I especially like the blurriness in the background. I kind of like that. Although, what I don't like about the blurriness in the background is the color is very different. It's a Japanese leaf maple, so it's very red and orange, which is fighting for attention with the flower here. So, yeah, you get one thing and you trade it for something else. That happens a lot of times. You improve. I mean, I really like this view, and I like the blurriness of the background, although it is a bit much. What happens is oftentimes you'll like one element that you change, but something else in the rest of the photo changes that you don't like. Compromise. Adulting is hard. Again, to overhead, trying some different things. Again, multiple photos here, changing a little bit of angles. Again, trying for sharpness, different composition here, going at an angle. Don't love it, don't hate it, including the other photos, the other flowers. It's okay. This is something I struggle with, compositions like this, is including other elements besides the hero element, how to arrange them relative to the main subject so that they're complementary and cohesive. I do better with stuff like this where I'm just minimizing and going for the one subject. So that's what I decided to do. I'm just going to zoom in now. I've done a couple things here. Here's what I've changed. One, I've gone to my 18 to 135 so I can, because that focus gets a little more magnification at its close focusing distance. Plus, it works really well with my extension tube. So basically, it's not quite a macro lens, but I can get to focus about 4 to 6 inches, which gets me really close and lots of magnification, which I like. Plus, it makes the background blurry, and I'm a fan of that too. But the downside is any motion is amplified as well. Just like the subject's magnified, any motion of me as I'm trying to create the photo while kneeling down and squatting and holding my camera and trying to breathe correctly gets amplified. So that means when you zoom in here, you're going to see it's not sharp. It's not sharp. That's camera motion, just a little bit of motion. There was a little breeze too, but mostly that's me moving. Even at 1/125th of a second, with the image stabilization on the lens, not enough. So that means we break out the tripod. That's going to eliminate me and my out of shapeness into the equation and get me a sharper photo. So I've decided, okay, I took a bunch. It's not working. I can't do it today. So I get out the tripod. Boom, we're getting sharper right away. Let's go back here and zoom in. So this is sharper than the first photo that I showed you. All right, so we're zooming in, playing around. I'm just kind of tweaking exposure, waiting for wind. Tweaking composition, waiting for the wind to die down. And then we're just going to zoom through these and get to the end. So as you're out creating photos, here is my advice to you. When you look at the back of your camera and you're not happy, don't walk away yet. You're not done. Something drew you to that scene, that moment. So pay attention to it. Ask yourself, what else can I do besides the first thing I do? Can I do a few more things in 2 minutes? And look around and see where you can move to, what different lenses you might do. Run through that checklist I gave you and see what you can create in 2 minutes. And then when you're done with the 2 minutes, you look back at your camera, then you got to decide, do I keep going? Am I getting closer? Am I making progress? Or sometimes what will happen is, not right now is what happens. It's the right's not quite right. The rest of the atmospherics aren't quite working well, or especially with nature stuff, maybe it's not the right season for the most interesting photo, the photo you envision. So maybe another day, come back another time is what will be your result of that 2 minutes. And then a third option that might happen when you're looking at the back of your camera after 2 more minutes is, this is really pretty to look at, but I don't know that I can create the photo I want. And that happens quite often. A lot of times it's just great to look at the world and experience it, and something gets lost in that conversion from our 3D real world to the 2D world of our cameras. And sometimes there's too much lost in that to create a photo that'll hold interest and attention. So there you have it, the 2-minute rule for more interesting photos. Hope you found this helpful. Some insights and thoughts and encouragements to when you look at the back of your camera and you're not quite happy, 2 more minutes, 120 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. You've got 30 seconds, go create another photo. They're pretty much free. If you have some other things you have on your checklist and you'd like to add those, please leave them in the comments below. I'd greatly appreciate that. If you found this helpful and can let me know, that'd be helpful too. And now we've reached the part of the video where by YouTube law, I am required to ask you to subscribe to this video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, there's more of that in the future, so come and join the journey. Also, you could like this video, which is greatly appreciated by me, and it also helps train the YouTube algorithm for quality videos that you enjoy. And lastly, if you would share this video with a friend or 10, wow, that would be sweet and swell, as we used to say when I was in high school. So anyway, thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing you again in the next video, which will be a question and answer video where I answer questions from my summer Intro to Digital Photography class, and I get to share them with you. So there you go. Look forward to seeing you in that next video. And I hope you stay well, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a great time out there creating photos. And if you didn't create the photo you wanted, take 2 more minutes and I bet you'll find it. Bye for now.